Snow had begun falling before dusk, thin as lace and twice as cruel. By midnight, it thickened into a blind man's storm, swallowing the sky, the mountains, the trail. A young girl trudged through it, her cloak sodden, her hands raw, holding up the weight of her mother's body with sheer will and something older than desperation. Her mother's breath came in sharp, uneven gasps, knees buckling every few paces. They looked less like travelers and more like shadows torn from the land. At the edge of the hills, a cabin blinked against the dark like an eye refusing to close. Its single window spilled firelight in a trembling line over the white, and the smell of smoke carried faintly on the wind. The girl paused at the porch, half sure her heart would fail her before she ever knocked. But her mother groaned low, clutching her swollen belly, and so the girl reached out, skin sticking to the frostbitten wood. She knocked once, then twice more, her knuckles blistered from cold. The door creaked, open like a secret, and there he stood, a man too wide for the frame, his shoulders rolling beneath a worn wool shirt, beard flecked with snow. His eyes, gray and still, rested first on the girl, then dipped to her mother, who was folded in pain like a wounded deer. She opened her mouth, but only a croak came. So the girl spoke instead, barely louder than the wind. "Can my mother give birth in your cabin?" For a long breath, he said nothing, only looked at her, as if deciding whether this moment was real or part of some old hurt revisiting him. Then he stepped back and said, "Get in." The warmth hit like a slap. Inside, the hearth was alive with flame, its light dancing over wooden walls and the heavy boots by the door. The cabin smelled of pine and tallow and something heartier, like stew left too long on the fire. The man moved with surprising softness for his size, clearing the table in one sweep of his arm and dragging a cot near the fire. Tess lowered her mother down, brushing damp hair from May's brow. Boaz Claymore. She knew his name now, had heard it spoken once in a letter thrown into the stove. Her sister Yunia had been offered to him last spring, a mail-order bride situation arranged by a preacher and a half-drunk matchmaker. But when the photograph arrived, Boaz wide-shouldered and ruddy-faced. Yunia wrinkled her nose and said, "I will not marry a beast." She'd sent back a letter with sharp words and sharper silences. Boaz had never replied. Now Tess sat in his home, her mother moaning beside her, and the air between them stretched tight with the weight of that rejection. Boaz handed Tess a kettle and gestured to the stove. "Yuvon girls sure know how to show up when the weather's ugly," he said, not cruelly. Tess flushed, but didn't speak. She poured hot water into a bowl and soaked rags like she'd seen the midwife do once. Boaz crouched by May, checking the baby's position with the carefulness of a man who respected pain. The storm screamed outside, but inside time slowed. May's labor dragged into the night. Boaz said little, only offered tools, towels, quiet guidance. Tess whispered encouragement through clenched teeth, watching her mother's body fight to open again for life. There was blood, more than she'd expected. For a moment, she thought they might lose her. Then, suddenly, sharply a cry. A baby girl, slick with birth, fists curled tight, voice full of fury. Boaz held her, almost reverent, before wrapping her in a flannel shirt and passing her to Tess. Strong lungs, he murmured. May wept, half from relief, half from shame. "They called me wicked," she said between sobs. "Said I should have buried this child with the man who fathered her." Boaz looked at her, something ancient and worn flickering behind his eyes. "This child ain't a sin," he said. "She's the proof you survived." Afterward, Tess stepped outside to fetch clean snow. The wind sliced her skin, but the night had cleared. The storm was over, leaving behind a world muffled in white. She looked down the hill toward the valley where their town lay, invisible now beneath the weight of distance and judgment. She thought of the preacher who'd warned May that bearing another child was blasphemy by womb. She thought of Yunia, sipping tea behind lace curtains, married now to a banker who barked at her in front of company. And she thought of this man, silent and broad and alone, who had not slammed the door. Inside again, Boaz was washing the linens, hands reddened from hot water, steam rising around him like ghost smoke. Tess watched his movements, the way he folded the cloth, wrung it out, set it by the hearth. She noticed his hands bore the calluses of a man who worked without ceasing. Yet they moved now with tenderness. "You don't have to help," she said. His eyes met hers. "It's my cabin. My rules." They worked side by side in silence, her fingertips blistering, his movements steady. When she winced, he reached into a tin and handed her a balm, thick with bare fat and wild mint. She rubbed it on, avoiding his eyes. "Why did you let us in?" she asked softly. He shrugged, returning to the cloth. "I've known what it's like to have a door closed on you." Didn't much like the sound. They didn't speak after that. The baby fussed, then slept. May breathed deeper. Tess settled by the hearth, wrapped in an old quilt, and for the first time in weeks, let herself believe in morning. Boaz sat across from her, cleaning his knife with a strip of leather. The fire carved shadows across his face, made him look like something older than this land, like a man born from it. He caught her watching him, but didn't look away. "You look like her," he said finally. Tess's stomach tightened. "I'm not her." "I know." She didn't know if he meant Yunia or her mother, or both. But something passed between them in that moment. Not forgiveness, not affection, but recognition. Two people shaped by shame and cold rooms. The baby stirred. Tess rose to check on her and found Boaz already standing, reaching into a carved trunk by the window. He pulled out a small blanket, hand-stitched, weathered soft, and passed it to her. "Made it for the boy I never had," he said. "Figured she might make good use of it." Tess took it with both hands, throat tightening. She wanted to say thank you, or I'm sorry, or even who hurt you first. But all she managed was a nod. She wrapped the baby in the blanket, her fingers brushing the stitched initials, BC. Boaz turned back to the fire and stoked it, quiet as breath. Behind her, May slept. Outside, the world had turned to crystal. And in that small cabin, warm with old pain and new life, something had shifted, not just in the room, but inside Tess. She didn't know yet what it was, but she knew it would matter. And she knew, too, that come morning, someone else might come knocking. Spring came slow and stubborn to the hills above Elkhorn Pass. Snow melted in patches, retreating like a grudge too long held, and the ground softened beneath the boots of a man who no longer walked alone. Boaz Claymore now moved through his days with an extra place at the table and a quilt drying on the porch rail, stitched with the initials of a daughter, not his own. Tess fetched water from the creek each morning, her skirts muddied, her sleeves rolled, and in her arms the child whose birth had cracked open the silence in Boaz's life. May, though paler now, had found a quiet rhythm. She swept the floors, sang old hymns as lullabies, and planted vegetables behind the cabin and earth Boaz had cleared for her with the back of his shovel. The days folded into one another like pages of a book too intimate to read aloud. But the valley below had not forgotten. Gossip traveled faster than spring thaw. Silas Pride, the storekeeper, told it to the preacher's wife, who told it to the mail clerk, who wrote it in the margins of every letter sent east. Boaz Claymore, the fat rancher once rejected, had taken in the Vaughn women. Not just housed them, asterisk kept asterisk them. Some set out of pity. Others whispered darker things. Revenge, lust, shame. Yunia Vaughn heard it all by post, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the parchment, tea growing cold in her porcelain cup. The letter said Tess was living in the hills. With him, the man she had refused. She imagined her sister in the bed she had declined, under the roof she had mocked. She arrived without warning. The morning had broken clear and gold-drenched, dew painting the world in soft light. Tess stood barefoot, feeding chickens, the baby slung against her hip. When the horse crested the ridge, she knew that silhouette before it dismounted. She hadn't seen Yunia in months, yet her presence rang through the air like a familiar perfume caught on the wind. Yunia stepped down with boots too fine for dirt and a cloak stitched in thread that shimmered. Her eyes scanned the cabin, the yard, the cradle on the porch. They met Tess's, cold as flint. "You look like Mother used to," Yunia said, voice smooth but sharp. "Before all this." Tess tightened her hold on the baby. "Why are you here?" Yunia walked past her without answering, straight into the cabin. May gasped from her chair, clutching her shawl, and Boaz looked up from a bucket of peeled potatoes. His hands stilled, water dripping from his knuckles. Yunia's gaze flicked over the room. So this is where the gossip lives. May rose, trembling. You weren't invited. I came to see my sister, Yunia said, not taking her eyes off Boaz, and the man she now shares a hearth with. Tess entered slowly behind her, placing the baby in the cradle as if to shield her. Boaz dried his hands on a cloth, his face unreadable. You came all this way to pass judgment? He asked. No, Yunia said, stepping closer. I came to understand what my sister has that I do not. The silence that followed had weight. Tess stared at her sister, heart beating behind her ribs like something trapped. You left, she said. You chose comfort over kindness. Yunia's lip curled. I chose a husband who owns land in 4 counties. Boaz stepped forward. Does he warm it with decency? That stopped her. Just for a second. Her eyes flicked down, then back. He doesn't sit in dirt with gutter girls, she snapped. May's voice cracked like dry wood. Don't you dare. Yunia turned to her mother. You shamed us. This baby, she is not your shame, Boaz said, quiet but firm. And neither is your sister. Yunia's breath caught. Her gaze moved to the cradle, where the baby stirred. Tess saw it then, the flicker behind her sister's practiced expression. Regret, raw and sudden, breaking through the porcelain. You don't understand, Yunia whispered, almost to herself. He doesn't touch me unless I'm silent. He counts what I eat. He laughs when I cry. Boaz stepped back, shoulders lowering. Then why stay? Yunia didn't answer. Her eyes brimmed, but never spilled. She turned toward the door, hands trembling. Tess watched her, a strange ache blooming behind her ribs. You can stay the night, she said. We have blankets. Yunia shook her head. I just needed to see. Needed to know if you would have been different. Boaz didn't speak. His silence wasn't cruel. It was full of things he didn't know her anymore. Yunia looked once more at the cradle, then stepped out into the light and was gone. Her figure melted into the trees the same way the snow had. Slow, silent, final. That night, the baby cried long and hard, unsettled by something in the air. Tess rocked her gently on the porch. Boaz sat beside her, carving a block of wood in steady strokes. She came to see what she lost, Tess said. Boaz nodded. Sometimes it takes looking at someone else's peace to know your own war's still raging. The baby quieted, her fist closing around Tess's finger. The stars blinked above them, distant and unbothered. I don't know what I'm doing, Tess said softly. Boaz paused his carving. Neither do I, but you're doing it. He stood and disappeared into the cabin. When he returned, he held something in his hands. A small wooden crib, not yet stained, its corners sanded smooth. Made it after you left to gather snow that first night, he said. Didn't know if you'd stay. Thought maybe she'd need a place, even if you didn't. Tess ran her hand over the edge. The scent of cedar rose warm and sharp in the night air. She'll sleep in it, she whispered. Boaz looked at her then, not with longing or pity, but with something steadier, rooted deep. And you? He asked. Tess didn't answer, not with words. She picked up the baby, placed her gently in the crib, then sat on the step beside it. She didn't move for a long time. The sky wheeled overhead, and the wind picked up a softness to its howl. Inside the cabin, May hummed to herself, unaware of how things had shifted just outside her door. Boaz resumed carving. The baby sighed in sleep, and in the hush of that spring night, a knock came again at the door.